Our program will now begin.
It begins with a bold idea. Some start on the grassroots level. Others grow to huge events. Marathons, triathlons, and other competitions are no longer for the elite. These endurance events are open for anyone who dares to try, and they now have mass appeal, attracting thousands of athletes striving to reach new goals and enthusiastic spectators cheering them on. These mass sporting events help build excitement and anticipation that creates broader opportunities for larger mega events. Using the power of sport for a cause can be powerful. They can raise money for charity or build awareness. Mass sporting events can help towns and communities that want to build tourism and economic development. In mass events, everyone shares the joy of the sporting culture. The marathoner trying to break 5 hours, the cyclist entering her final race, the athlete enduring his first Ironman, and even the volunteer on the sidelines who is now motivated to participate in next year's race. Whether on the streets of Abuja, or the tracks of Tokyo, or the stadiums of Qatar, mass events are bringing more people to the shared experience of competitive sports. What's the next innovation for organizers around the world?
We are wild.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome
Sayyidati, Sadati,
time world champion and reigning triple jump world record holder, Jonathan Edwards.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to day 2 of Doha Goals. We're going to focus on mass participation events. A quick show of hands. Who has taken part in some sort of mass participation run, triathlon? Yeah, a fairly good number of you. I thought we could start this morning with a bit of mass participation aerobics, but I decided against it, so I've let you off. But back in 1981, it was a very big year in Britain because the London Marathon started and the Great North Run started. And everybody wondered whether this would catch on or not, but it certainly did. And just this year at the Great North Run, we celebrated the 1 millionth finisher in that race. So there's no sign of this craze, if you like, for mass participation abating. Let me introduce the panel for you. I think you're going to be very instructive on this. First of all, an old friend of mine, Simon CLEGG. He's now the Chief Operating Officer at Baku, but he was the chef de mission for all of my 4 Olympic Games. Marije, DEUTEKOM, I hope I said that right, former rower and professor at the University of Amsterdam, looking particularly at the para sports. Elana MEYER, silver medalist in the 10,000 meters in 1992 Olympic Games. That was the first time South Africa had been back in the Games since 1960. A keen amateur runner, Nicolas, SULTAN, and partner at the management consultancy firm Kearney here in Qatar. And then Rob URBACH, who's the president of USA Triathlon, has had a very distinguished career within sports and business. Okay, there's a hashtag for Twitter, hashtag Doha Goals. Please post your comments, your questions, and towards the end of this session, there'll be a chance for you to ask questions of the panel on this. Elana, let me start with you, because mass participation started with running, really. Are you amazed at the way it has caught on?
You know, absolutely. I think, you know, mass participation events has got so much potential. You know, it really offers athletes the opportunity to run with professionals. It inspires, it creates cultures. You know, I can maybe just share that in South Africa, we have an event, the Comrades Marathon, that is 90 kilometers. You know, and in South Africa, people almost don't perceive you being a runner if you haven't run the Comrades Marathon. You know, so it really has got the ability to transform and to create a culture.
Rob, let me come to you, because triathlon is new to this game of mass participation, but it's incredibly successful. Talk about your experience at USA Triathlon.
Sure. Our sport has gone through a geometric growth over the last 10 years, with essentially double-digit growth. I think the community is very, very unique. You know, our community is very, very inclusive and collegial, and oftentimes the most exciting place at the race is the person who's coming in the very last, where maybe they've done a triathlon for their first time and never envisioned themselves as being a triathlete. And it's very, very powerful, very emotive. So it's also exploding throughout the world. There are now 120 triathlon federations throughout the world.
And what do you think the appeal is of basically pushing yourself through hell? Again, with running as well, Elana, because it's not easy at all. There are lots of simpler ways to keep fit. What do you think it is about mass participation events which has proved so successful?
Well, I think it's the social energy, in the sense, at least in the triathlon community. You know, it's a very, very powerful, where people are going through a life transformation, and it's really no disrespect to our single sport brethren, but there's something about the complexity of the three sports that's very powerful, that draws people in. So the ability to cross-train and get all those benefits from the three sports is pretty unique, and the ability to put all those together creates it's a very, very hard sport, and yet we're very, very inclusive.
Marije, part of your research is into the power of sports.
Yeah.
What have you found out by looking at mass participation events and the dynamic around them?
Yeah, we did some research on mass running events, and what we saw is that it is indeed, well, it creates a huge power, social power, in a sense that participants in running events, they say that they get more healthy, that they want to obtain their healthy lifestyle, and also for people who weren't active before they started training, or before they signed up for this event, they say, well, this really does something for me. I feel better, I feel more energetic, and I want to remain, to feel like that.
Do you think the major motivation is to be healthy, or, as we so often see with these big events, they raise millions and millions of pounds for charity? Is it about a charitable motivation?
No, in the runs I evaluate, it's not really about charity, but it has something to do with doing something together with friends or with your colleagues at work. So it really is the sport which combines something. And we also see that if we look at the people who run for their business or for their organization, that they also, besides that they say they are more healthy, they also say, well, I feel more part of my company and I know my colleagues better. So that really the issue of training together and running together, and then the focus is not really for them to start training for health, but it achieves more.
Elana, I asked this question to Rob about the appeal of those events. Again, running is just, I find it impossibly hard, to be perfectly honest. What do you think the main motivation is for people getting involved in the success?
You know, I think running it really is accessible. You know, anybody can run. You know, if you can walk, you can run. You know, and most of these mass participation events, you know, it really offers the opportunity. It doesn't matter how fast you go, but it is overcoming the challenge of taking up, you know, a distance and completing the distance. So it really is a very personal challenge. And I think, you know, that is also why myself and Francois Pinard, that was yesterday up, you know, on one of the photos, you know, one of South African legends, you know, receiving the World Cup, you know, with Mandela in the early 90s, when we just united as a new nation. You know, we took hands earlier this year to relaunch the Cape Town Marathon, you know, but also build into the DNA of the event a peace component, you know, so it really stretched across many boundaries. It's not only about, you know, it's not only about running, it's inspiring, it is building social capital, you know, it's so much more than a running event.
You talk about inspiration, and obviously one of the big aspects of these mass participation events is having the elite runners at the front, and then the masses, as we call them, behind, the amateur runners. And I just wonder how much of an inspiration the elite runners are, because they're almost like a different category of human being. Elana, when you were running a 2:25 marathon, or you see the incredible triathletes, Rob, doing what they're doing, the amateur experience is so far away from it. Could that be double-edged? Anybody, go ahead.
Well, I think the unique thing is, I've run a marathon, as an elite athlete, and it really is a fulfilling, a sense of fulfillment when you, as an athlete, as a competitor, finish the race. But, then I've also done it as a charity runner, and crossing the finish line, you also have that same sense of achievement, fulfillment, and especially, attaching it with a charity, you also bring a lot of purpose to the event.
Well, I think the courses are the same. So the amateur athlete, the age grouper, is participating on really the exact same challenge and course. It just takes them a little bit longer. But the sense of fulfillment could be the same. I think, again, it's really powerful to see the elites engage and cheer on the age groupers in the back of the packers. I think it's a very, very powerful thing when the elites come back and do support and continue to draw more participation.
Well, Nicolas, we'll talk about the economics of mass participation events, because that's your expertise, but you've taken part in runs here in Qatar just recently. As an amateur runner, do you find what the elites do inspiring? Does it have any impact on what you do as an amateur athlete?
Yeah, I don't think I'm running faster, but
no.
Well, I think we discussed this backstage, right? Yes, definitely. This is sports. As a mass sport event, you practice with the elite, right? So if you are a participant, you're a runner, you're an amateur, but you're also a fan. So it's also opportunity to practice your sport with the elite. And I think this is very specific to mass sport events.
Marije, you just want to come in?
Yeah, I think we also have to be careful because especially if we want to motivate people who are not active at all and who do not sport at all, the role model, the elite athletes, they're so far away. There's such a big gap between the inactive people and the elite athletes that sometimes it may be even something like, oh, well, that's so far away or so fast, I will never achieve that. So sometimes I think for people who are active and are sporty, I think it can help. But to motivate the real inactive people, to motivate the role models can just have the opposite effect.
So a bit of a difference of opinion on the panel. If you've got a view on that, hashtag Doha goals, it would be great to know whether you think the elite runners are, or competitors in triathlon are hugely inspirational, or whether actually it's irrelevant to your participation. Simon, we were both involved with London 2012, and it was a debate that we had, I think, about how you would take an elite sporting event and use it to inspire the general population. What would your take be on this?
Well, I've been lucky enough and privileged enough to spend my entire career in high-performance sport. Really, high-performance sport and grassroots sport are not mutually exclusive. One thrives and feeds off the other. You need elite sport, you need role models for sport, you need role models for society, which top-level athletes are as well. And this can be an inspirational factor in terms of motivating people to take up sport and to push themselves, because it is about setting personal goals. These mass participation events are about people setting individual goals that are achievable. But I think that in terms of mass participation and grassroots, we need these people to come into the sport, because without people entering the sport at a young age, you actually end up with no high-performance sport. So they're not mutually exclusive. One feeds off the other. And in London, whilst the whole focus was around the Olympic Games and staging the Olympic Games, as you said, the big question mark was, that's fantastic for the 10,000 athletes that are going to come from all over the world to London. But actually, how do we use the staging of the Games to inspire a nation? And certainly taking it out to the regions, whether it was the torch relay, whether it was our Nations and Regions programme, it did touch parts of the whole of the country that the London Olympics wouldn't otherwise have touched. So I do think that this whole issue about mass participation is critically important to not only feeding the elite system, but also to the well-being of the individual and the well-being of the nation.
Let's get on to who these events attract. And Marije, we talked a little bit beforehand about the demographic of mass participation events, which generally isn't young, and it's generally for people who are more well off, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. The average age, at least what we see, is about 35 years old of participants. and an equal distribution of men and women, at least in the running events. And yeah, mainly the participants are indeed pretty good off seen financially. So it's the events we evaluated, they do not really attract the people who we would really like to get in action. And I think that's also one of the goals we could share with Doha Goals, to see how we can really inspire the people who are not active and need action and activity the most. And in my studies and at my university, we also try to see what the role, for instance, of technology, all kinds of apps and other new devices is in order to get those people into action. And maybe also we can see what kind of events are they even are they shorter, or are they more social, or do you combine music with it? I don't know yet, but we want to see how we can attract this new market.
And Rob, I guess it's even more difficult in triathlon because suddenly you bring in 3 events and you've got to spend a lot of money on a nice bike.
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly our sport is gears towards more the upper demographics. However, we believe that in the underserved communities, that we're lowering the barriers of entry from not just from a financial barrier, but from the psychological barriers, the physiological barriers can certainly be lowered. And the first component is learning how to swim. So there's a number of initiatives, certainly folks in communities that don't have access to swimming lessons or pools or proper ways for swim training. But we believe it's really more about cultural adaptation than it is necessarily about the financial barriers. And so we're looking to various communities where triathlon, at least in the U.S., is not a diverse sport as of yet. And so that's a key initiative for us going forward, and certainly could look for some insights in the community here.
And I guess, Elana, confidence for some people is a big issue. Being able to go along and compete with thousands of other people and not feel stupid, to maybe not feel worried about your body image or whatever it might be. There are all sorts of barriers beyond, as Rob said, money. Oh, it's gone. Go on, Nicolas.
Yeah, I think interesting also is, as you said, like there are some psychological barriers to running, right? But if you look at different formats, we're talking about Ironman, right? I mean, this is really the elite, right, and the most challenging competition. But you have anything from 1K to whatever, 50K, you mentioned 90K, right? So there's a lot of variety of format for running. So, I mean, if you lower a bit the barrier 1K, I think this is affordable for many people.
And Elana, in terms, and again, Marije as well, in terms of people's confidence to enter events, so the social barrier, the confidence barrier, what would you say about that?
You know, I think there's a huge opportunity, you know, and many events are doing that, you know, to introduce a coach for, you know, for somebody that wants to run their first marathon, you know, and that already gives you, you know, if you follow this coaching program, you know, you are really well prepared to run a marathon, you know, and there's, I think with all the technology, there's so much more opportunities now to really activate into a much larger community, you know, and to give people the confidence that, you know, just follow this step by step and you will be ready for the, you know, for the distance that you're attempting.
It's also in terms of format, we discussed that, right? There's a quarter marathon and a half marathon. So there's step by step before engaging into a full marathon. And Ironman, right?
Well, certainly in triathlon, the swim can be quite an intimidating barrier, particularly open water swim, where it's essentially a contact sport with a lot of people in the water at the same time. So a number of triathlons are geared more towards be less intimidating, whether they're pool swims or the swims are not open wave starts where there's less contact or even less current. So there's certainly a way and a pathway towards going up in your distance or your intensity of racing. But I think it's really important to lower that psychological barrier for mass participation sports. And many people could never visualize themselves as a marathoner or as a triathlete. And a lot of programs and coaching community, and at least in the U.S., it's a lot of the club network. There are over 1,000 triathlon clubs, and most people find their way into our sport through a club network. They could be at a friend's who's a triathlete. They could go to that friend's social event, and all of a sudden they find themselves on the track at a workout. Next thing you know, they're starting a triathlon, 6 months later without having really realized they could do that without the support of their community.
Marije, what's your view on this? Because you said that the demographic generally older, generally well off.
Yeah.
What are the innovations, perhaps, that
Yeah.
you could see to reach out to those kind of people?
Yeah, what we see is we also looked what the role of apps is in a preparation.
Sorry?
Apps, so mobile applications. And what we see is that the people who use an app, they are indeed more motivated to increase their training volume and also to improve their diet. So we really want to see what's happening there. Is it really such an application which has an effect? So that's an interesting thing, and we also try to see what kind of functionalities do people want, because we see my neighbor said something about the training schemes and all kinds of advices, but we see at the same hand that if we ask people when they use an application, what kind of things do you use, they say, well, only the average speed and the amount of Ks I run, and the rest it's too complicated for me. So that's also something. And also, if we ask people who don't use an application, what would you like to use, or what do you think is interesting, they say all the more fancy stuff. So there is something happening, and I don't really know what it is yet. So we're going to look further to have more cues to be able to motivate those most in need.
I may have a provocative thought here.
Go.
But should we allow people, instead of calling running, like allow them to walk, right?
Sure, I don't mind. No.
I have to tell you, having run a marathon, I spent quite a lot of time
Walking.
Walking marathon, right?
So we've talked a little bit about the social and the economic, the sporting side of things. We're going to move on to the economic impact of mass participation events. Nicolas, let me start with you. Is this big business?
Well, it's a difficult question. The answer is not. It's not a big business yet. It's indeed a very fast-growing business. Indeed, you mentioned double-digit, right? I mean, it's basically turning in a non-business into a business. And if you look at the economics, indeed, in the US, for instance, marathon doubled, right? The revenue of marathon doubled over the last 5 years. So it's very impressive. It's high double-digit growth. Yes, so indeed, it's a fast-growing business. I mean, we'll be talking about psychological barriers. There's also somehow economical barriers, right, to do these sports. If you, if you want to run a marathon or an Ironman, I mean, you need to. It's not only the participation fees, but it's also like travel cost, right? I mean, you don't get an Ironman at the end of the street in your city. So there's a lot. I mean, and also from a broader standpoint, it's a business where cities are very much involved. Right? It's as long as you have an event in your city, you can attract tourism. Probably, I don't know, there's numbers, right? But probably 15 million people travel. They travel to attend a sport event. So, from a broader definition, yes, it's a big business per se. Right? Mass event is a fast-growing niche business, and I don't know how much you want to disclose your numbers, but it's highly profitable as well.
Well, Rob and then Simon.
I think it's all relative. You know, the triathlon industry didn't exist much 10, 15 years ago, and now there is a whole infrastructure and economic systems built around triathlon training, coaches. There are 30 race registration companies. So in certain regards, I guess it wasn't much of a business 10, 12 years ago, and so from that standpoint, it's a significant business. Additionally, municipalities as cities, it's more destination racing and events where they're staying 3 and 4 nights. So if you say a 5,000 person race, you know, maybe 25,000 hotel room nights, and it becomes pretty significant to the host cities and host committees that are hosting some of the big mass participation events.
Just before you come in, Simon, I'm going to go to questions from the floor in a couple of minutes. So if you can put your hand up, there'll be people going around with paddles and microphones, and there's any questions, you can put them to the panel. Simon.
Jonathan, you mentioned a moment ago that in your introduction that the London Marathon started in 1981. It's been going for 33 years. I think we need to recognise that has generated £450 million of charitable benefit that has been put back into good causes in the UK. So I think that there can be some very positive spin-offs of charitable events like the London Marathon. I mean, you take an event like the Athens Marathon that's taking place this weekend, that's being organised by a good friend of mine, 35,000 participants. they reckon that the economic impact of that event on Athens is between 23 and 25 million US. So I totally agree with Nicolas that in the global scale of things, these are not huge figures, but in the terms of those individual towns, cities and municipalities, as Rob was saying, these can be quite important, as well as, not just in terms of the economic impact, but also in terms of the marketing and the positioning of those particular cities to an international community.
And I guess, Nicolas, there's an interesting mix here between the public and the private sector, where you have public funds perhaps from a city or from a country with an entrepreneur, a business entrepreneur who wants to put on an event.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, I think we discussed it a bit. Like it's a mix. Like it's a business on one hand, it's a non-business as well, right? Should people pay for participating in an event? I mean, if you look at participation fees of marathon on average, it's almost double, right, over the last 5 years. So this non-business is turning into a business. For good or not, I mean, I'll leave it to you guys.
Right.
I think that many of the events, as mentioned, have charitable components, though, and so I don't know what the total number is for participatory events and driving charitable and community. So almost every event race will have a charitable component or a give back portion of the registration fee into local communities.
And I think it would also be interesting if we want to say something about the economic impact of an event, not to only look at the direct economic effects, but also if we see indeed that an event can lead to a structural sport participation, that's also an increase of a huge health benefit, and in the end probably also an economic benefit. And I think that's something where we should also look at if we say something or look at economic impact of events.
It's interesting, there's a lot of economic modelling now which is happening in the UK and I'm sure across the world about the impact of well-being and a kind of a happiness factor almost, which should be factored in, I guess.
Well, I think that that mass participation sports certainly play a big role in lowering the world's healthcare burden. We have a massive issue of 21st century metabolic diseases, and at least in the triathlon community, we know that folks that have had adult onset diabetes are now not able to come off their medications. We know there's issues in addiction behaviors, etc., that certain therapies aren't working, but participating in a sport seems to be the antidote to things that society hasn't really solved yet in many countries.
Questions from the floor? There's a couple over there. Whoever's got the microphone and the paddle. And if you could make your questions just sharp and to the point, that would be great.
Thank you very much. I'm Farhad Ehsan from Pakistan. My point is that apart from marathon or like this, we can even promote different sports. Like one sportsman who plays multi-sports, like Usain Bolt, he plays he's an athlete. He's play cricket, football, so that we can attract many sportsmen, or we can attract many people from all around the world, so that they can be motivated to participate in all the events, and that would be very great. How do you think so? Do you have anything to say about that?
So I guess the question is about the diversity of events that are put on. I mean, I'm not quite sure how it would work for cricket or football, but I guess this is part of the innovation, Simon.
I think the key to mass participation events is keeping it simple and keeping it available to the masses. I think triathlon has done incredibly well to move what was a phenomena based around individuals running to take into account the other two disciplines. And generally speaking, people have access to water and can learn to swim, and generally speaking, and this is a gross generalization, people can have access to a bicycle. I think the challenge is where to next. Certainly in the UK, we've seen these unbelievable mud events, ultra running events, people running through fire, running into mud pits and the likes. This used to be restricted to people in the military, but now people seem to pay to put themselves through that degree of pain. Where this goes to in terms of other sports, in terms of mass participation, where you need specific equipment to participate in it, or specific courts or facilities, I think is the challenge.
There was another question just along over there as well.
Hi, I'm Andy Brussman with Alchemy Global in the US. Question for Rob. Can you talk about some of the growing pains that your industry is facing in the States, and would love to hear, elsewhere as well, and how you're dealing with some of those growing pains?
Sure, I think one of the issues is challenging to stage triathlons, where it requires a significant more cost for controlling a road and closing down a road. With municipal cost, I don't know how in Hyde Park, I think they closed down 62 bus routes to close down the course there. I'm not sure how that works, but at least around the country, it's very, very difficult to stage racing more and more with municipalities, certainly in the need of additional funding. So it becomes, from the production side, it becomes very expensive. And so we're looking for various opportunities to reduce those costs for race producers at various venues where the cost of production is lower, so that the fees the participants pay can also be reasonable and lowered.
Yeah, we had all sorts of fun and games, didn't we, with London 2012 and road closures, Simon?
Yes.
Yeah. Question at the back there, lad in the blue top, I think. That was loads of questions.
Yeah, my name is Mark. I'm from the Young People's Sport panel in Scotland. I would just like to ask about the impact that these events would have on communities, like hard-to-reach communities that are not generally involved in sport, and those that don't really have an interest specifically in sport, and how we could go out and reach to them to then support these events.
Yeah, it's a very good point, and I think Marije, we've touched on that, but probably just a few more thoughts from you.
Yeah, the question was how
to reach communities who perhaps feel completely disassociated from general society. How do you engage them?
I think, well, that's also loud thinking, and that if we think about role models and people motivating, that we should look for people close by, like who is your friend and he did it, like how did he did it, so why don't you? So try not to make this huge gap with stating this elite athletes, but trying to make it very close by and see that it's possible. I think that would be one of the ways, and also to try to really understand what people think about sports and about health, and not try to think about our opinion. I mean, we all love sports here, but there are many people who don't love sports, and to get into their minds and what they think and not what we think.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point to finish. We're out of time. It's mass participation events, incredibly successful by all sorts of measures, but still a long way to go in reaching people who perhaps aren't attracted by them. Please show your appreciation for our panel. They've been outstanding. Thank you for your questions.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mandala CEO Lorenzo Bustani.